Welcome back to another session where we're going to recreate those water cooler conversations between peers and colleagues. And we're going to do all that via an intimate and less formal discussion for a group of experts who share their expertise and best practice. And please remember, subscribe to our YouTube channel to view all the latest content. But let's get today's discussion underway. My name's Neil C. Hughes and I'm your host for today's conversation, where we're going to talk about improving agile transformation, identify what that means, and much more. And thankfully, I've got three panelists joining me today. So to begin with, Nick, can you tell me a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so thanks, Neil. So Nick Rudd, I run the consulting team at MMT Digital. So we're very focused on enabling our clients to realize value faster from the digital products that they build. So that's my role, to sort of help those clients get true value from their digital products.
And Georgina, can you tell everyone watching a little bit about who you are and what you do too?
I can. So I'm Georgina Owens and I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Liberis. Liberis is an organisation that delivers embedded finance to our partners through a distribution network to merchants. And with the merchants, we are advancing cash to help them grow.
Fantastic. And last but by no means least, Steve, could you tell everyone watching a little about who you are too?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Steve Westgarth and I'm the Global Head of Engineering for a company called Haleon, which is a consumer healthcare company that you may not have heard of, but has recently launched as a spin-out from GSK, which you will obviously recognise as a company that sells all sorts of products like Sensodyne, Panadol, and many, many others. So Haleon is our new consumer healthcare company that is now responsible for delivering everyday health with humanity.
Well, it's a pleasure to have the three of you here today. Now, in recent years, Agile has become somewhat of a buzzword in business, but I want to set the scene today. And Nick, I'll throw this to you first. Can you tell me a little bit more about what Agile means and also what value does it bring to businesses?
Yeah, I think for us, the way we look at Agile is lots of people say we do Agile. And then what you need to then do is unpick what a client means or a delivery team means by Agile. Yeah. And of course, what we really want is high-performing teams delivering valuable outcomes for the customer. So we need to design the right product and then start iterating towards the outcome and delivering those valuable products to customers in the real world. And Agile enables you to do that effectively, and importantly, enables you to change as the business needs change. Because one of the challenges when you're not in an Agile world is you design up front and you build those requirements over a long period. Agile is really enabling us to be really adaptive and responsive to the customer and stakeholder demands to release those products in a digital development space. And what it's also trying to do is align the business to development, because one of the challenges as well is that they often talk different languages. So here we're interfacing very tightly between the business needs and what is often seen as a black box. It's just a combined team delivering outcomes, and that's what we really focus on. So understand the problem, design the right solution, but be flexible in the way that you go about then developing and iterating towards outcomes.
And you mentioned speaking different languages there, Nick. So, Georgina, I'm conscious that defining what Agile is and defining what value it can bring to a company will change between different organisations. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because Agile for me is just an evolution of the ways of working. And I think that it has absolutely become a buzzword, and it's become something that apologies, Nick, lots of consultancies have sprung up around and look to make lots of money from. But I think, it really is just an evolution of what has always been a way of delivering. And it's taken away some of what I would consider to be some of the bureaucracies to definitely to make things happen more quickly. But yeah, I mean, we can go on to some of the pros and cons of that later.
Absolutely. And Nick, is there anything you'd like to add on to that, since you were brought into the conversation there?
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a myriad consultancies out there who will tell you how to do this. The challenge with how to do it is often those companies aren't living and breathing it. One thing at MMT that we're proud of is we have a thin layer of consultancy support to advise clients, but actually we have a depth of engineers who live and breathe what we talk about. So we're not providing just advice, we're actually providing a large range of engineering support. We're putting in specialist roles in that to ensure we've got governance and measurement, etc., in the delivery, and that clients' projects get delivered. In a world where getting the right skills into an organization has become much more challenging, people come to a business like MMT to say, well, how can you support, with governance and advice on how to do it, but also how can you augment our teams and implant people to sort of make sure we realize value fast. And that's where we come in. So we're very aware plant people, clients of their own teams who do this fantastically. Our job might just be to support that, but the reality is, sometimes it's just knowledge transfer as well. So we're often put in some of those people who do knowledge transfer and pull back out again. And I think that's also important as well, because however good you are, you're always learning to be had. I think that's the important thing. We're not trying to stand still and say, here's the method. We're actually trying to say, how do we continually evolve? How do we continuously improve? Which is part of the ethos of Agile, really.
And I think as soon as something reaches buzzword status, there's a fair amount of myths that quickly follow. So, Steve, are there any misconceptions around Agile that we can finally lay to rest today? And what are the most common mistakes that you might have seen businesses make?
So I think from my point of view, I would probably say that we need to focus on the why.
Yeah.
So we often hear people talk about Agile or wanting to work in an Agile way. And I think what we've done is we've conflated that with a whole raft of methodologies that have sprung up right across the industry. And you've got people that say, well, you can't do that because that's not Agile, or that's not the way to do something because it doesn't conform to some framework. For me, we all need to kind of go back to what we actually mean fundamentally by the word Agile. And when you talk to businesses, when I talk to my business stakeholders, when we're talking around what we want to deliver, it's very much outcome focused. So the business needs to achieve something, needs to achieve a business case, needs to achieve an increase in revenue. And Agile is a means to an end in order to achieve some of those things. So when the business talks about being Agile, what they really mean is being responsive to customer needs. They really mean getting things out of the door in a timely fashion. And there's a fantastic story. It's about a bridge which was actually built in Honduras over the Cholichoca River. And when the bridge was built, obviously it was built over the river, the construction crew were doing that work. And then there was an earthquake in 1993 before the bridge's construction finished. And the river actually moved out from underneath the bridge. And there's a fantastic photo which shows this bridge now over what is perceivably a piece of land with the river running alongside it. And I think that is a really good analogy to kind of to say what businesses are actually going through at the moment. You've got a changing landscape where customer trends are changing, customer demands are becoming ever more precious. And actually what businesses are saying is we need to respond to those customer demands in the right way, in a timely fashion. So then you look at that from an IT context, or you look at what we're trying to deliver in terms of those outcomes. And historically, your companies have tried to put a lot of control around development projects, and understandably so. You're investing many millions of pounds in some of these systems, in some of these transformation programs. And yes, it makes sense to kind of say, well, of course we want a plan. We want to make sure that actually we've got some upfront certainty in terms of what we're going to get for that money. All of these things aren't unreasonable, but actually, if you do it in that way, these programs take such a long time to actually deliver, right? So what this really is about doing is breaking down work into incremental chunks and then working in a way where we can actually approach the problem with enough knowledge to solve the most pressing problem at hand. And I think if we can all kind of coalesce around this idea that this is all about delivering customer value, making sure that we get customer value out of the door as quickly as we possibly can, and making sure that actually we're working on problems that we have the information available to us to solve, so we aren't wasting time guessing or producing estimates for things that are so arbitrary we haven't really kind of got that thought process in mind. If we can move our mindset to that focus on the customer, I think that's really where we need to be kind of heading. And I think that you're right in saying that that there are a lot of misconceptions around Agile, and there really are. I think businesses have really kind of struggled with that idea. I mean, particularly your finance directors who would say, well, of course they want to know what they're going to get value for their money. This is not saying that they're not going to have the reports and the information that they need in order to make good investment decisions. What we're really saying is just invest smaller amounts of money at a time and do it incrementally so that we actually have the ability to control where we want to drive our business to.
100% with you on that. And Georgina, when you hear the word agile and you see it in a business environment, any myths, misconceptions, frustrations even that you think of?
Yeah, I think something that's becoming very common amongst my peers that I'm talking to at the moment is that, with such pressure from the business to deliver, and it, to constantly focus on revenue and profit, the business needs certainty. And so that means they want dates. They want very solid dates as to when things are going to be delivered by. And in particular, when you're selling a product to a partner, as we are, they can't accept, well, that might be 2-3 sprints. They want to know, give me a date, and give me a very defined process, sign-off process, a QA process. So there's a lot of, I think, challenge in businesses at the moment trying to match that need for delivering to dates and an agile organization, and keeping your product and your engineering teams working in an agile way. I find that at the moment is quite a common theme that I'm hearing and I'm experiencing myself personally.
Neil, if I can just come in and response to that, I think that is also a challenge that I also face in my own business and in other businesses I've worked with. This kind of focus on wanting to know when something is going to land. But I think the thing that I've always found is that actually, whenever I've worked on a project that commits to a date, I've never actually really seen a project ever achieve the first date that's committed to. So actually, what we're really trying to sell here is to say that by adopting this methodology or a different way of working, we can actually give more certainty of what you're going to get and when, and actually really boil down to what the MVP is, what we really can deliver, by a certain point in time, without kind of focusing on delivering the whole world, which some of that may be needed, some of it may not be needed. And I think we've used some tools and things to kind of help to take the business on those sorts of journeys. So, I'm a big fan of a burn-up chart, for example. So as we have a number of agile teams working, we measure accurately the velocity of those teams and how much they're actually delivering. And if we look at the total scope of what we've got to do, based upon our MVP, and you then draw that and almost kind of graph it onto a chart, you can start to actually say, well, based upon our current velocity, there's quite a high degree of certainty we're going to deliver around this time. So, for me, what it's about doing is taking the problem space, which is, I need a date, and then finding a way to translate that in our context as a group of engineers, so that we can present that information in a meaningful way that actually relates back to the way that we work on the ground. But it's definitely a challenge that I've had, and I know a lot of other businesses had. So I would completely agree with Georgina.
Yeah, me too. Great points from you both there. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I've seen is just getting everyone on board and enabling everyone to see the bigger picture and implementing the right culture. So, Nick, how important is it to create that vision from the outset and get that buy-in from the very beginning?
I think there's a massive risk at the moment when people are trying to run so fast that you can build the wrong thing. And building the wrong thing is one of the most costly things you can do, because I get Steve's point that you want to be able to manage velocity and everything else, but if you didn't decide on your North Star, if you like, what your vision was, and build an ability to tie back to that in every sprint and every deliverable and every planning session, then actually you're in real danger. So for us, one of the key things that we sort of advise people on is just make sure you've got clarity of the North Star. And that could be, at a business vision level and then the product vision level. And those things should align. If you can't tie your product vision back to your business vision, then you're probably building the wrong product. So for us, the critical thing actually, before you get into Agile and all this other stuff, is decide on the business need, the business problem, the customer need, And that becomes your North Star. That becomes your clear objective. If you've got a goal within the business, everything should be tying back to that goal. And that's where you start from. You don't start from somebody saying, I need this widget, or I need this thing built so it'd be cool, or this is going to change the world. Like, how's it going to change the world? How's it going to align back to that North Star that we set at the beginning of this product build? And if we can't see that and articulate it back and play it back to stakeholders, we should probably stop. And that's really hard to do. It's really hard to say to somebody stop, because they're in full flight and they got burned down and they're spending money. But spending money on the wrong thing is worse, I can assure you, because you end up in a really bad place with a lot of debt. So for us, it's always about get the vision right. If you're clear on your vision, you know where you're going, and you've got a reference point for everything you do.
I think, Nick, that also ties back to this misconception within Agile that businesses can change their mind literally on the spin of a coin. And I think that, there's an old adage, which I was constantly taught when I was in school, which is fail to plan, plan to fail. Nobody ever said in an Agile project that you shouldn't plan. And actually, I think, planning is actually, in an Agile context, more important. And to your point about what your North Star is, if I'm going to go maybe on Around the World tour, maybe I want to know at least that I'm going to go to Italy, even if I haven't quite decided that I'm going to go to Rome. So, there are things within an Agile construct that you can change, that you're absolutely right. You can realign around business priorities and kind of can almost kind of pick and choose what you do and when. But there are some fundamentals around the architecture kind of building within, and the the way that you're approaching the design of your systems, that does actually require some upfront thinking. So, actually encouraging businesses not just to dive in and think, actually, let's just start immediately kind of working. Just take a step back and say, hey, you know what are we actually trying to achieve here? We might not know all the features yet. We might not know what it's actually going to look like from a customer perspective. But actually, to your point, what's the North Star? Where are we actually trying to drive the business to? And if you can express that in the term of an OKR, I found that very useful. So OKR, if people haven't heard about it, is objective key results. And one of the best examples of that I've seen, it's actually in a fantastic book called Measure What Matters. So when Google started to use OKRs, they have an example where they talk about what they did with YouTube. So when YouTube was first purchased, they set an OKR to say, we want to achieve 1 billion hours of watch time every week. And that OKR set everybody's objective, that North Star in terms of what we were doing. And the whole company was able to orientate all of its activity towards going towards that North Star. How do we achieve 1 billion hours of watch time a week? So it's how you get your focus and make sure you set the right direction of travel, while still giving enough autonomy into the teams to be able to make, for the team to make empowered decisions. If you tell the team the why, let the team figure out the how. And I think that's a really important concept.
I think, though, that's really dependent on the scale of the business and the size of the business and the maturity of the business. I mean, we're a startup going into scale up. So we're kind of coming out of that phase where it was, where it's really exciting and you're just building stuff and everybody gets involved in a bit of everything. Going to that stage where we're starting to add people, add a bit of structure, starting to think about, I mean, even all the basics like the reporting and the metrics and, and I think when you're at that stage, that's probably one of the places where Agile can be most misinterpreted, because you're working with a business who's also at a very early maturity day, and like you say, they do think that Agile for them means, oh, that means you're going to deliver really, really quickly, and I can, change my mind really, really quickly, and I don't really need to say very much about what it is that you need to build, just kind of get on with it. So I think, big enterprises where you've probably got, hundreds of people and teams dedicated to doing the reporting and the documentation of the methodology and all that sort of stuff, it's very, very different.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that point. I think that there are huge differences between startup world and corporate world, and I've been fortunate during my career to work in both types of organisation, and I think they actually both face very different types of problems. And it's when you look around LinkedIn and you kind of look about the way that people talk about agile and kind of approach it, you hear people kind of saying, so SAFe, the Scaled Agile framework, is something that a lot of large enterprises have kind of tried to adopt. And if you come out on LinkedIn and say, "Hey, I like SAFe," you will have a million people will comment on your post, tell you why SAFe is the worst thing in the world and why you absolutely shouldn't look at it. And then you look at the other side of the coin. You've got the agile purists say no, empowered teams, small teams, that you're maybe focused on one specific problem, or you're maybe less complexity than maybe a large corporate is going to face to you. That's kind of where you need to be. And I think the answer is somewhere in the middle, right? So in my own enterprise, we have we use a framework similar to SAFe. And is it perfect? Absolutely not. Does it help us achieve to a means to an end by helping to take our whole organization on this big journey? Yes, it does. And as we become more mature, we probably will take lots of the SAFe governance kind of out of what we kind of do, because we inject agile into the body of kind of how we are. But in a small enterprise where you haven't got those governance structures, yes, you can afford to be more agile, but actually, I think what you're saying, Georgina, is actually in some cases, you actually miss some of that lack of process that kind of sort of sits around that agile team and actually gives the business the assurance that they need. So I don't think going to either end of the spectrum is necessarily where we need to play as leaders. I think you've got to find your happy middle ground somewhere where you can actually play in a way that is agile, that achieves the business outcomes, but doesn't necessarily polarize to one extreme or the other.
Yeah, I think also to take that point, Georgina, that when you think about the startup world, at the very start, there's a founder or maybe a couple of founders, and the why is very clear. And as you bring people in, they all buy into the why. They buy into the reason for that company being, and they buy into what it needs to do. So their North Star's got absolute clarity. They talk about people, doing different jobs. They do the different jobs because they're very clear it's going to help with the outcome, because it's going to move us closer to our why. I think the challenge is then as you scale up and you become more like an enterprise, people move further away from the why. They're not talking to the founder. They're not talking to the CEO. They're moving into teams, and their touch point back to the vision of the business can get further away. And I think one of the important things is to, keep that message flowing down from leadership all the way through the organization as to what's really important for us. Build the culture around that and know, and then you can behave more like a startup and getting things done quickly that deliver value. Whereas some people just lose that in the organization. They move further away and think they can just ask people to do something. If people know why they're doing something, they're much more responsive and much more, aggressive about getting it done, because they see the difference they make. Part of the psychology of people is they want to see the difference they make at an individual team level. And that's where you get high performing teams. They bought into it and delivered something that they thought would be really cool and valuable. And engineering teams get off on that, which is great.
An interesting perspective that you might give, Nick. So, you've talked there about the founder's vision, which I think is in a startup, you're right. Someone has a vision for where this is going and wants to build a product. So that makes a lot of sense. But there has to come a point where actually you challenge, is the founder's vision actually what the customer wants? And, for me, actually moving as quickly as we can to a world where we're talking directly to the customer, connecting the engineers to the customer base is important. We had a really interesting incident at the beginning of the year where our leadership said we were going to build an iPhone app. And we set down this track of building an iPhone app to launch in Italy. And after 2 or 3 months of kind of working on this project, somebody came out having done some market research and said, you do realize 80% of people in Italy use Android, right? And that sort of misalignment has come from an assumption that's been made by leadership that actually this is where we kind of want to be. But actually, by looking at the market and where we're going to, actually that assumption was wrong and it was challenged in the right way. So at what point, and maybe this is the perspective you can give, is it right for an organization to stop focusing on what the founder thinks or what the CEO thinks is the right thing to do, and actually switch tack to talk about the outcome the organization is trying to achieve and what the customer actually wants?
Yeah, I think good leaders, Steve, make it true, don't they? Because good leaders recognize that tipping point. They really realize they need to scale out teams. They realize that sometimes those teams are better equipped to inform what should happen next. If you look at someone like Gymshark had a very clear idea, didn't they? Build these really cool clothes that people are going to look great in at the gym. Really clear. That became an aspirational brand. It then became a global phenomenon. But actually, if you look at the founders, one of them took a slight step back and one of them said, do you know, I need some help now. I'm going to bring in a really experienced C-suite who can tell us how to keep that business going, how to stay close to the customer, how to use data, all those other key attributes that become key as you scale, because it's no longer about what you think. It now needs to be backed up, doesn't it, about what's reality. Where's the data? Tell me to focus. You've got to keep looking at data points. You can't just keep going on, you know, here's my idea and it's fantastic. It's okay at the start, but you need data. I don't know, Georgina, what you think to that. You're living that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. You know, the companies that are successful are the ones where, on the whole, the founder steps back and brings in that experienced team. Because the founders are passionate about the idea, but they're not necessarily qualified to build and scale an organization. So, and it's good. I think it's good to have them there so you can stay, you know, you can maintain that contact and the vision and the passion, but you know, put around it the support and the structure to build it in the right way. And I think, you know, a big part of the second stage of scaling up is where you're actually validating the product, because initially you're going to get it out there and you're going to get it out there quick and you're going to try it and make sure it works. But then you need to make sure and recognize that in the validation stage, you might actually throw away what you've already done. And you're starting again to build it properly this time. And that's also, you know, a very valid thing to do for the business and the customer.
Point a moment ago about measuring what matters, and you can only improve what you don't measure, and creating reference points and measuring success along the way. But I know this is something we could talk about for hours, but as we're running to the end of the episode now, I'm going to ask each of you, what is one takeaway, one brief takeaway you could leave everyone today with about using adaptive agile frameworks, creating a vision, implementation, measuring success, that whole journey? What is the big takeaway? And Steve, I'll send that to you first.
So I think for me, it's about using the framework, but not becoming the framework. You know, I think this is about making sure that you're actually operationalizing something which works in your own context. Yes, you need to look around at what good practices out there. You need to look at what the frameworks can offer and all of those things, but never lose sight of the focus on what you're actually trying to deliver and the focus on the customer. And don't move to a world where you're just implementing a framework. You know, make sure you focus on what you're actually trying to operationalize and what you're actually trying to deliver and where that value is coming from and how that's going to serve you all to the end customer. And
Georgina, what would you leave everyone with today?
A similar thought, which is just, you know, do what's right for you, and don't be afraid to change direction. So constantly reassess and make sure, you know, that the decision you've changed and where you're going is still the right one. I think that's really being agile.
Fantastic. And Nick, to bring us home, what would you leave everyone with?
Yeah, I mean, for me, start well. You know, don't start until you can start well. I would say make sure you got clarity of what you want to achieve and be ready to adapt. That's the key thing. Be ready to adapt with the customer and the business needs, and then everything will be fine. You know, there's a few things in there that if you build like that and you build predictability, then the business will love you forever. And your customers will love you because they know when they're going to get something, you know, and they're going to get the right thing. And that's the key, really.
Fantastic advice. Well, Georgina, Steve and Nick, thank you so much for joining me today and bringing this topic to life. And for everyone watching, remember, we have so much more content like this. We'll keep the conversation going. So please check out the CIO WaterCooler website, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.